and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. Today's guest has made a career of disappearing into other people's lives. On stage, he's been John Proctor in The Crucible. On screen, John Porter in Strike Back. And to millions of cinema goers, he'll always be Torrin Oakenshield, the Dwarf King in Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. But away from performance, he's turned to writing. First with a taut thriller set among Nobel Prize scientists, and now with a novel that takes him back to his own roots, to a village shadowed by trauma and secrets, and to the long shadow of childhood memory. Richard Armitage, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thanks for having me.
It's really great having you here because, of course, I know you as the handsome hero in all the Harlan Coben television shows, and you've done so much else, as I've described. But what a surprise to pick up this book and find out this is not just another celebrity churning something out under somebody else's talent. You've actually written this great book.
You wouldn't believe how many times I've had to defend myself as a writer already, which I think is why I kind of immediately put my hand up and went, can I write another one? I was sort of surprised myself that I could actually write something longer than an A-level essay, because that's really all I've ever done. But when I was preparing character for screen or stage, I would write quite a lot of biography to fill out the sort of backstory of the character. That was my practice. So I knew I had a kind of free-flow style, but whether I could coordinate that into story structure was something that was a bit of an experiment. But now I'm bitten by the bug, I can't stop.
Oh, it's fantastic. And so how did it actually come about? It happened through audio, right?
It did, yeah. So I'd read quite a wide range of other authors, thrillers, all kinds of different things, and building a base of listeners that really enjoyed.
So you'd read them out loud for Audible, you'd narrated the books.
Yeah, because they commissioned original content. They said, would you be interested in writing a crime thriller for us? And I immediately said, yes, I'd love to. And then they started talking about ghostwriting, which is what you referred to when a person puts their name on someone else's work. And I said, not on your Nelly. If I'm going to read this, I'm going to write every word of it. And so then they got a bit nervous, and then I had to audition my writing style and sort of audition a story idea. And then it worked out. And I was guided with a brilliant editor who came from the Fleming estate. So I had, some good brains to assist me. And what was surprising to me is that because it was crafted to be listened to rather than written, it was a slightly different method to what I expected.
And how was the difference in narrating something you'd written yourself as opposed to reading somebody else's work?
Well, when you're reading someone else's work, you've got to make it work for them because it's the author's voice, and you want to set the scene for them. You want to, deliver their characters as they intended. When it's your own writing, I was far more critical. And actually, I had to deliver a finished manuscript before we started recording. But even in the recording, I was making changes because it's just things that pop out when you didn't expect it. And that's the thing about audio, and that's my editing process, is just reading aloud over and over and over to make sure there's no unconscious rhyming, the sentence balance. There's just something musical in the ear that I really enjoy. So it's very pleasurable.
I mean, it's funny, I speak to so many authors who've narrated their own books, and they all say that you can't stop editing, and at some point you've just got to step away. Yeah. And so is what you read the same as what's here in this published book?
Yes, you can't really see spelling mistakes in an audio, but so we corrected some of the spelling mistakes. But yeah, it is unabridged in both mediums. So yeah, I think I'm working on a third book, which might have a slightly different format. So we might have something different for audio than we do for print, or something more for print, just to make those companions work better.
Exciting. We'll come back to that. Let's dive into the past, though. You grew up in Hunket, in Leicestershire, the son of an engineer and a secretary. Tell me about that.
Yes.
What were they like, your parents? Were they big readers?
Not really. I think my dad was very mathematical. He was a nuclear engineer. My mum was his secretary. That's how they met. Dad was from the north, he was from Leeds, and Mum was from Wallingford in Oxfordshire, which is why North and South rang so kind of acutely with me, because John and Margaret, same names, the Gaskell novel that I was in, and they kind of met in the middle. And so there was a sort of interesting resonance with that. But my dad was very mathematical and subsequently very musical, so he was a sort of Mozart aficionado. My mom loved story and she was very creative, but I guess she would read Barbara Taylor Bradford and things like that. So I picked up my love of story from school, really.
From reading at school. And you were reading because, obviously you have to at school, but you were being bullied too.
Well,
it was a way out.
But also being read to. I mean, I had brilliant English teachers who would read to us, which I always encourage. When I'm on the road doing, the book interviews, you meet a lot of school teachers and we talk about reading aloud to kids. I was around a group of what I would now refer to as nerds, and we would get, there was a bit of bullying that happened, not just to me, but to, there was like the hierarchy of school was very obvious. And so music and literature were my escapes. And it's interesting because my taste in literature was very much about adventure. So Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Roald Dahl, all of these stories where there is usually some kind of secret door to another universe. That was where I escaped to, really.
Fabulous that you loved Tolkien then. And
yes.
Of course, you're so well known now for playing one of his big characters.
Yes. Yeah, and actually that was the book I remember the most from our English teacher who would read The Hobbit to us at quiet time. And I would go home and try to do the voices she did for Gollum. She was better than Andy Serkis. Sorry, Andy. And I think that's when I realised, I'm really enjoying this immersion. And I mean, I was really little, so I didn't think a kid like me could ever be an actor or a performer. But I think that's where the seeds were sown.
What did you think you'd be?
I wanted to be an architect because I used to play with my Lego and I'd build houses and create like rooms. And I, my mum and dad were never happy with the house we lived in, and I'd sit there sketching it and trying to make it better, like moving the kitchen to here and putting the bathroom, I'd do all of that stuff. But I wasn't mathematical at all. My brother got the maths brain, I got the arts brain. And of course, architecture is an extraordinarily long training course and you need physics, and I didn't have any of those skills.
But I love the way that you've brought that into the book because, of course, the lead character designs his own house. I mean,
yes.
There are so many strands from your own life that we're seeing in this book, The Cut, including children being bullied and a horrible, horrible murder. Now, there were a couple of murders where you lived when you were a child. Yeah,
and I was very careful not to use that directly. It was almost like a tapestry behind me because, obviously the families are still around and I didn't want to sort of use their story. But I do remember it hitting the news when I was a kid, and we were all very protected from it. But there was a definite change in the atmosphere of the surrounding villages when, we used to walk home from school or get our bikes home, and all of a sudden every kid was being picked up by their parents in a car. And there's a line early on in the story where I talk about, people don't forget when children are murdered. I suppose what I was using was the idea of people moving on. So some people stay where they are. I definitely got out of my small town and went as far across the world as I possibly could. But the girls that were murdered and the girl in my story that's murdered, their potential is stopped too soon. So I was trying to tap into those things.
Mm-hmm. And your first stage of moving away, really, was going off to a vocational independent school.
Yeah, I went all the way to Coventry, which felt like a lifetime away, but actually it was about 30 minutes on a bus. And I became a weekly boarder. And it was a place, I think my brother wanted to go to Loughborough and study football, and I wanted to study, singing and dancing and drama. And so I went to a school where that was on the curriculum. It was after, you did your schoolwork, and then after hours you did all of those things. So I suddenly felt like I was around like-minded people. And I did go from being a sort of C-, slightly below average student in every subject to getting A's and B's in O-levels and A-levels, which was really unexpected. It was definitely worth it. Yeah, I mean, you'd found your tribe. I had found my tribe, and so I think, something happened in me. I just changed. How much does sexuality and people's perception of your sexuality fit into the bullying and how everything changed once you had moved school? Not a huge amount, actually. I didn't know at the time what I was being bullied for. I don't think it was necessarily about sexuality. It was just about the things I was interested in and who I was hanging out with, because I was clearly hanging out with like the not cool kids. I was also observing the people who were, not just boys, but girls who would get bullied as well, that there was something about them that was just a bit different. And it's really interesting because as a grown man, I go now to a lot of conventions because of the work I did on The Hobbit, and I meet people who you might describe as misfits, but when they come to the convention sort of dressed in character, they suddenly find a community. And I, even as a sort of 40, 50-year-old man, I look at them and I think these are the people that were the bullied kids in school, and now they've sort of found this community. So I've started doing more and more of these conventions because I just love that they've found their place, you know.
Oh my God, that must be hilarious, though, going to these things full of people who are completely obsessed with the fictional character that you play.
There must be a psychology behind it, and well, certainly in a small way, I found it is that, you know, you're bullied into silence, and I've sort of tried to write about that in the book. But you find your voice. I found my voice through drama, and you know that's not just an emotional thing. It can be a kind of psychological thing too. You know, I worked with an actor, brilliant actor on North and South, who had a profound stutter, but the minute he was given someone else's lines to speak, it just disappeared and he became completely fluent. And I think that sort of sums up the whole notion of stepping into character.
Do you think that kind of bullying also exists, though, in the artistic world?
I think less and less. I think, you know, most people that come into the arts have, I mean, part of the job, or I mean, I would say 90% of the job is empathy and putting yourself into other people's shoes, particularly in my work, but also as a musician or a painter, you're trying to imagine what it's like to be, you know, inside your picture or inside your music. So I think artists and the community of actors tend to be quite liberal, people that bond and make very fast relationships, and that takes empathy to do that. You have to really understand people.
Yeah. Now, young actors these days will have no idea what I'm talking about, but people of our generation will remember that there was very, very few ways of getting your equity card. I had to do it as being a children's entertainer, right. Georgie Porgy, the clown. You did it through the circus.
I did. Yeah, I remember going to those open auditions where there'd be like a line that said equity members, non-equity members, and the non-equity members were basically just cattled out of the door called exit, and you weren't even seen for the job because it was unionised at the time. So the only job I could get at that point was a contract in a circus in Budapest, part of a seasonal show that was there permanently. Yeah, and I threw hula hoops at jugglers and skateboarders, did a bit of singing and dancing, and came back with an equity card. I remember the day it dropped through the letterbox, and I held on to it, going, "Now I can get into the other line." So I did. I would go to the open auditions and get kicked out of those auditions too.
But I mean, it's hard to stress how important it was. It was the one thing that everybody there was nothing you could do without it.
Not really. It was a bit like Willy Wonka's golden ticket. Once you found it, you're like, I'm legitimate. I can actually go to work. And weirdly, I look at it now, and I'm a big supporter of equity, and I always pay my subscriptions because they do a lot of work for you. Like, you don't realise when you're in work that, you know, you're insured through them, and, you know, your pay grade is sort of regulated and, you know, negotiated by them. So, but at the time it was like, it means I'm a legitimate actor.
Absolutely. Of course, going to LAMDA and being employed by the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company, makes you doubly legitimate. Yeah,
and, you know, when I left LAMDA, the only thing I wanted to do with my life, and I would still be in that position now, I wanted to be part of a company like Complicité, Théâtre de Complicité. I came from physical theatre, musical theatre, and that's what I wanted to do. I'd seen a number of their productions, and all I wanted was a lifelong contract with them, and it didn't work out like that. But I did get to the RSC, and that was a real badge of honour.
Yeah, what were you playing at the RSC?
I started actually at the Birmingham Rep. I did one show at the Birmingham Rep in Hamlet. I was Bernardo. The first production I did at the RSC was Macbeth with Tony Sher and Harriet Walter. I was playing I was understudying the Bleeding Sergeant, and I was spear carrying.
With Harriet Walter, who of course has just written her own book.
Yes. So yeah, that was my kind of first attempt at Shakespeare. And then I went back for the next winter season and did The Duchess of Malfi. I had a great time.
What would you say was your kind of big breakthrough into getting regular work, which then catapulted you into sort of public consciousness?
I remember, like, auditioning for a third season at the RSC and being offered Spear Carrier again. And I sort of said to my agent, why am I not moving forward? And he said, well, you've really got to get your face on television because that's what brings people to the theatre to buy a ticket. So I started really pursuing that line. And I suppose there were two breakout roles that I had. One was in Sally Wainwright's retelling of Wuthering Heights called Spark House, where I played Farmer John. And went kind of full method, went and worked on a farm and, stayed in a Yorkshire accent for the whole time. Wow. It didn't wash. So that was a concerted effort to really dig deep. And then North and South, and as I said, the parallels with that book and the sort of resonance that it had for me, just particularly about the industrial North, it was full immersion into that character. And it was picked up and received really well by an audience. So,
So you really are a method actor. I mean, you want to completely immerse yourself. How do you do that in a fictional world like The Hobbit?
There's always a method. But the idea of method being that you stay in character for your entire life of shooting it's a myth, because if you're playing a serial killer, of course you can't be going out serial killing. For me, method means just not winging it, having a sort of plan of study. So for Thorin, I went right the way back to that same book that I told you I was reading at 7 years old, which if you put it on the table, it would crack open at Riddles in the Dark. And I took it all the way down to New Zealand, along with a library of other Tolkien books, and I created a room full of pictures and quotes from everything that had ever been said about this character. So I could go into my Thorin room and just look at maps on the walls and pictures that I'd created. So and that really helped me to just go back into the place that I needed to be to shoot.
Fascinating. And of course, for The Crucible, John Proctor at the Old Vic, you won an Olivier Award.
I was nominated. No, that was the year Mark Strong won the Olivier Award. But no, it was nice to be nominated, yeah.
Did it make a difference? I mean, was there a moment then? I suppose what I'm trying to drill down into is that if there was a point where you suddenly could say, I've made it.
There is never that point. There's never that point, because just when you think that of yourself, then life will trip you up. I have to say there was a pinch me moment when I got down to New Zealand for The Hobbit, and I did know that you'll never really get an opportunity quite like this again, because it was going to be 2 movies and it was a long period of time. Those films, the Lord of the Rings films, I held them up in such esteem to work with Peter Jackson. So that is a moment where you think this is probably as good as it's going to get. But yeah, certainly The Crucible changed me as an actor because it pushed me further than I'd ever been before. And I'd tasted the play at drama school in scene study. I hadn't done the whole thing. I remember getting to the end of the second week of rehearsal and we were timing it at 2 hours and we'd only got to the end of Act 2. And I said to the director, I was like, how long is this play? And she said, have you never seen it? And I said, no. She said, it's about 3:45 minutes. And I was like, so wait, we're doing a 2:30 matinee and a 7:30. That means I get 40 minutes to prepare between shows. She went, yep. If I'd have known that, we would have done a 2:00 matinee. But no, it was brilliant. It was really challenging. And I'm going to actually work with that same director again, Yael Farber, next year.
Tell me a little bit more about working with Harlan Coben, who's been a guest on this programme, and we love him here. And of course, you starred in a number of his works. Is that difficult, playing a different person each time?
Yes, I always feel like that with everything I do, that if you're on TV too often doing too many things, you kind of risk being found out. I always think, he's going to be found out. I was surprised that I was being asked to come back, but then I started to enjoy the idea of being part of an ensemble, and I think Harlan and his team with Nicola Schindler, they do assemble an ensemble of actors that they enjoy working with, and they bring them back in different roles. I think Jimmy Nesbitt's about to work up there again. But Harlan's become a good friend and mentor, and I've really observed how he is as an executive producer of his own work. And he's very hands-on, but he's also very democratic. He lets the work go. He allows it to be changed. He is a bit of a mensch. He knows everybody's names on set. He's very warm, very friendly, knows everyone, knows Bruce Springsteen. We were singing a song, me and Sean Dooley, in The Stranger in a car, and it was a Bruce Springsteen song. And for any music on TV, you need to get permission if it's more than 30 seconds.
Yes.
And he was like, yeah, don't worry, I'll call him. So he picked up the phone. Bruce Springsteen said, yeah, no, it's fine. You can sing it for as long as you want. I don't care. And I remember thinking, wow, okay. He just picks up the phone to Springsteen. But yeah, I know he's been amazing.
And did he help at all when you decided that writing was something you wanted to do? Because, of course, I mean, he is such an incredible writer.
I was shooting Stay Close at the time during the pandemic, ironically called Stay Close when we were being told to stay as far away from each other as possible. So he hadn't come over to England at that point, and I was using my lockdown time to write. But then when the book was finished, I sent it to him and asked him if he would put a quote on the back, and he immediately went, "What are you doing? Stay in your lane, Armitage." But I did have to point out to him that he often would do an Alfred Hitchcock cameo in all of his shows. So I'm like, touche. But I was interviewing him for I Found You, which I loved, one of his earlier books. And he gave me an amazing piece of advice, actually. I snuck it out of him in an interview, but he said the worst kind of writing is no writing at all. So you've got to get something down on the page in order to shape it, which is very similar to walking into a rehearsal room on the first day, feeling like a lump, feeling so uncreative, and you just got to start. And I've always taken that as a sort of little bit of advice and treasured it. But he's amazing. He's just such a good guy. And he will always text me when the show's on. It's like, we've got 49 million hours of da-da-da-da. And he's a champion, yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that his writing style, the way he writes thrillers and things, influenced you in the way that your books have both been in that genre?
Every author that I read for Audible influences me, and because everyone is so different and the way that they deliver their story is so different. But I know what I like. I know what captures my imagination when a storyteller begins, not just from books, but from the way a television show is offered to you. You know within the first 15 minutes if this is going to be something that grabs your attention. So I really have tried to sort of distill that into what's the thing I really like to write about and how. Because, I mean, the idea of a slow burn book is probably a thing of the past unless you're, maybe over 60, because attention span is becoming shorter and shorter. And if it's not kind of compelling in the first 5 pages, then people will put the book down.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about Geneva then. This was your first book.
Yeah, that was what I was writing during lockdown. I'd been interested in a scientist called Sarah Gilbert, who was part of the team that was developing the vaccine. And because there was so much misinformation on TV, she was the one person that I was paying attention to because she was so level-headed and so without panic over the whole situation. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to take a character like her and then make her doubt her own sanity? I wanted to write a story about a gaslit marriage. I'm also fascinated with altitude and the Swiss Alps and that really unusual juxtaposition of Geneva being quite a sort of Renaissance city, but there's this sort of cutting edge technology that exists there. So I thought, these are the foundation stones of a story that I'd be interested in writing.
And by then you had the Audible contract or the...
Yes. So when they said, come up with a story idea, of course, my brain immediately went to work and went, oh, okay, I've got all these little pieces that I could put together. And I'd written the first... Because I love that moment because I'm an avid skier, and when you drive to the mountains and you come off the motorways and you get into those hairpin bends that wind you all the way up to the little village you're going to be staying in. And there's something that happens to me. It's almost like a head rush, and it is partly to do with the lack of oxygen. But I thought so I wrote that sequence first, of just the philosophy of altitude. And I thought, okay, so you're in a heady place where the oxygen's thinner, and people behave strangely up there.
And what kind of reception did Geneva have?
I think it did okay. There was surprise that I'd actually written it. And that becomes very clear when you have to sit and talk about it. Yeah. But yeah, people tapped into different things. It was termed a destination thriller, which I didn't realise I was writing. But of course it makes sense because, 2 people from an ordinary suburban background go to an extraordinary place. So that made sense. And then it was optioned by Sony TV, Sony UK. So we're working on a screenplay. So they clearly like it as well.
And so this was all provided enough momentum to do another. So take me back to the beginning of The Cut. Now, yes. I understand one of the inspirations was going to a cemetery with your father.
Yeah, so my dad wasn't well, and I was spending a lot of time at home. And I would do a nostalgia walk, which was me walking up the school lane where I used to go to school, seeing my primary school, which had shrunk weirdly, or I'd got bigger, I can't remember. And all of these things, I'd walk to the leisure centre where we used to have bonfire night, and I started to sort of piece together, all of the memories of being a kid, and the endless summer holidays where we would just disappear on bikes. And I was up at the cemetery, and a gentleman of the same age as me approached and said, sorry for everything you went through at school, but you've done really well for yourself, and, good on you, mate. And as I was walking back home, because I was with my dad, and I said, I just didn't remember him, but my dad did, and he had stayed in the village. And it just triggered an idea of, because I couldn't wait to get out of the village and go explore the world, but some people stay and they don't necessarily move on, and they, it just made me think about the trials and tribulations, the highs and lows of childhood. How do they manifest as adults? And what happens if there's something that needs atoning for and hasn't been, even at the age of 40 or 50? It's sort of unfinished business. So I started to craft a story about somebody that comes back to their home to atone for something that happened. Yeah. Try not to spoil the book.
No, exactly. But I'd like to talk about the structure, because that's really interesting, because you've got a double timeline going on. And how did you manage that? It must have been slightly, even as a reader, I was like, just skipping back. Hang on, was that the 90s or is this now? And so keeping it straight in your own head.
Yes, and I'm sorry about that, because I probably wouldn't do a split timeline again, because for that reason, because unless you read it all in one go, it is a bit, you do have to jump back a bit. But I wanted the listener, the reader, to feel present in the past. So I wrote the 1993 sections in the present tense, and I wrote present day sections in the conditional tense. And the language is slightly different as well. I wanted the reader and the listener to remember what it was like to be at school. And so the language is of a 14-year-old group of kids. And the sort of foundation is the story that happened then, and what's happening now is a response to that, or an interrogation of that. So I had to work with, later on in the edit, I had to work with cue cards of different colours, and I'd lay them all out on the table and make sure I was being faithful to my plan, which was to do one in the present, one in the past, and I wasn't doubling up on anything, and making sure that everything in the past was somehow relevant to what was happening in the present. So there were chapters that had to be binned.
And it must have been easier to do as audio, because of course you've got different voices there,
yes,
so you can...
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do it again.
With this kind of structure, how do you decide what to reveal and when?
Well, that's the bit that you spend most time doing, because and I'm doing it again with my third story. It's not split timeline, don't worry, but there is memory. So constructing 1993, the entire story, and in a way a bit like a big bar of chocolate, and then breaking it into lots and lots of little pieces, and then realizing, okay, I'm going to reveal this piece now, but I'm going to shave a bit off so that I can save it for later, because the picture has to come together incrementally, and if it comes together too soon, then you've sort of blown your ending. So it is, I know it's a familiar analogy, but it is like pieces of a jigsaw, and you do the borders first and then slowly, and it's just that last piece that goes in that you go, oh, that's it. Now I see it.
Yeah. It was fantastic, because I read a lot of thrillers, and I'm always sort of trying to outguess, always trying to get to the solution before the end. And this really did just hit me at the end.
Oh, good. Good. I'm so glad.
Yeah. And it just, I thought it was brilliantly done. Now, you've teased us a little bit about your next novel. And I understand, although it's not a double timeline, it might be about double people. We're talking sort of Jekyll and Hyde-ish.
Yeah, I do. I sort of begged Audible. I was like, can I please write another one, because I've got another itch that I want to scratch, and it's something that's come up a lot in all of the characters that I choose to portray on TV and film and on stage. The sort of inner tension between the yin and yang, the sort of the devil and the angel. Ironically, the sonnet that I chose to read in my first year at drama school was "Two loves have I, of comfort and despair." I think it's in the cut as well, this idea that we are kind of two people, often more than two people. The sort of wrought tension of a split personality, inspired by my experience of reading Jekyll and Hyde for audio, but also Dostoevsky's The Double, and William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe, books that I've just dipped into and thought, oh gosh, that's really interesting. The idea of, again, somebody whose mind is not stable, but believes they have a doppelganger.
And you said earlier that you might structure this in a slightly different way?
Yes, because of course, memory will play a part. It has to, in a way. You can't really exist in the present without memory. And I love writing about memory, but the central figure in it is piecing together a memory of something he believes to have happened, but it's a false memory. So yeah, I'm trying not to do flashback, but so I'm using therapy as a way of accessing that memory. So because therapy is something present, isn't it?
Are you in therapy?
In drama school I did regression therapy, and I have been working with a regression therapist, but it's more about exploring creativity and opening doors of creativity, which so I think that's what's going into the book, actually, these sessions, which are quite joyful, actually, because you discover things and, it can be quite trippy.
It sounds amazing. And I love the idea that this is about a sort of double self. So, I mean, finally, I wonder which self, which Richard Armitage will we see going forward? Richard Armitage, the actor, Richard Armitage, the writer, or are we going to have them both in parallel?
I hope we have them both in parallel, but one of them is feeding the other. I don't think that I would be a viable seller of books if I didn't have a screen presence or a stage presence. And that is my first love. I'm getting back on stage next year, probably in the second half of the year, and back on telly. It's a strange thing. My agent always says, "Oh, you're a reluctant performer," because the word performance is such a strange thing to me. I love inhabiting roles, but sort of having to show it off is really tricky for me. And I've always put it down to the idea of, I like painting the picture, but I don't want to stand in front of it waving my arms around. So, and that's the double self, isn't it? The person that is on stage, but the person that doesn't want to be on stage.
Yeah, well, I say bring on every version of Richard Armitage. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Georgina.
The Cut by Richard Armitage is published by Faber & Faber. It's out now. You can also hear it on Audible. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Tom Webb, Steph Chungu and Elliot Greenfield. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.